Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the March 24th New Tracks Meetup. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you enjoy the show. I think you will. I hope you'll come back often, and I hope you'll tell your friends about us so that they can join us too. I want to encourage everyone, if you're new, to register at our website, newtracksmodeling.com. And when you have registered, then you need to confirm it with the email that will be sent to you. So after you've confirmed it, then you'll get all of the notices for all of our other shows by email. And that's the only way that you can get the login link is by registering on our website. And the reason for that is security for the Zoom meetings. Now I'd like to turn to Paul Thomson for his quick tips of the evening. Paul?
Hi, Jim. You caught me a little off guard there. I was still looking around for things. Okay. Tonight's quick tip. All right. Tonight, I just thought I'd mention a couple of things that if anybody's looking to get into DCC and buy a Digitrax or something like that, a lot of times you find that you need an extra power pack or something like that. And of course, you don't want to buy one. So what I thought I'd point out tonight is these are some of the things that I've picked up at shows for $10, $20, sometimes $15. And as you can see right here, I got one that puts out 2 amps, variable. I also picked up one that has 2 1-amp outlets. These will do, the 2 amp will run an O-scale locomotive at times, and all of this will run HO on DCC. The bonus to this is, of course, you now have 16 volts of AC sockets on some of them. And if you're running accessories, this can be a very useful outlay. And at the same time, I've got DC on this one. So it depends on what you're looking for. Just have a good look at it. I bought this twin for, I believe it was $20, and one of the knobs was broken. I pulled it off, and lo and behold, it was just a misplaced spring, and I've got a fully functional unit. So that's one way you can cut your cost with DCC. And of course, on the back, you've got your output to where you would run into your DCC. And that's basically my tip for the night. Look for a rather reasonable power pack at some of the shows. They can be had. Okay, thanks, guys.
Paul, thank you so much. Any way to save money is good news. We really appreciate it. The next My Build is going to come up May the 29th with Chris Course moderating it. I hope that you'll attend that show and share your modeling with us. There's going to be a special build along, special section of My Build on March the 31st with Greg and Chris moderating it. And it's going to be for those modelers who have been following with Greg and building along the Conowingo Models kit that he's been building. Tonight will be his last build of that model. And after that, then on March the 31st, we'll have a special My Build so that everybody that's building along with him can have a few minutes to talk about their model and show it to us. And we really hope that you'll do that because we're love to see what you've been building with that project. So the next thing that I'd like to do is turn this over to Greg Cassidy, who is doing the build for the Conowingo model. Chris, of course, can't be here this evening. He had to be out of town. So Greg is going to have to do the last one here all by himself. So Greg, thank you so much. And I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Jim. Let me get stuff fired up. Okay, welcome everyone to the first New Tracks Build Along. I'm Greg Cassidy. I call it the first New Tracks Build Along because Jim has a lot more of these lined up after this one, and I'm looking forward to them all. But this is the last build of the Conowingo Models Gray Street Company House version. So I'll take you through. This is going to be part 5. we'll be doing the roofing and the finishing touches. As always, I'll be covering techniques that any modeler may know. Here's what I'm doing with this kit. We'll start with the roofing. Roll roofing or mineral surface roll. If you look up roll roofing MSR, you're going to find out it isn't very good. It leaks, it doesn't wear for very long. Its only advantage is it's cheap and it's easy to put down, which is why we see it used a lot, which is great for us that model it. Now, the last time we were working with the roofing, we had the construction paper that came in the kit, and we had spray painted it a gray and then a black over that. And what we're going to do with that is slice it into strips that are about 3 feet wide, and then sand the edge of that on a block. That gives us the look of how it wears. And then we're ready to put it down. We'll take the strips of roofing and we're going to attach those to the roof panels that we painted previously. And once you glue your strips down, you want the edge that you sanded to overlap. And you can use white glue for gluing this down, and then you can have the ends go over the edge of the roofing. Then after you have them all glued down, you go ahead and trim the overhang off. I like to leave a little bit overhanging, and you'll see why later. First, we're going to glue the back roof in place. I'll put a bead of white glue around on the top of the walls. And in some cases, I'll put a brace up at the front of the roof, but you don't really need to do that. And then we'll glue the porch roof on the front, and it's done the same way. You just put a bead of glue on the 2 roof supports and across the brace that's sitting on the porch posts. And in both of those, make sure they're centered right and left. And then last, we'll go ahead and glue on the main roof. And again, you just put a bead of glue around on the walls. And this is the way I like to weigh it down while it's drying. And again, you'll want to make sure it's centered right and left. Now, my friend Bob Farquhar has a bean bag that he uses on his roofs. I didn't have a bean bag, but I did have some BBs and a plastic bag. So I thought I'd give it a try. It didn't work as well as Bob's does, but it did work. And once you get the main roof glued on, you need to attach a ridge strip. And for this, you just take another sheet of your roofing and fold it in half and then glue it in place. Now this is where I like those edges overhanging a little bit. If you kind of roll them down once you have the roofs glued on, it makes it look like it's old and worn. And I think it just gives a better look to it. Now on one of the kits I built, I put a metal corrugated roof on the porch. This is something that somebody may have done when they had to replace the roofing, and this was all they could find, or this was all they could do. Feel free to experiment with corrugated roofing. You can find these roofing panels from many online modelers. Next thing we're going to do is fit the roof trim. This is the 1/32 by 3/32 strip wood that we painted earlier. First thing you need to do is mark where you're going to cut the trim. I'll put it underneath the piece of roof and then use a pencil to mark it. Now you can go ahead and cut it by hand or use a chopper. One of the things that I think is the ultimate tool for this type of job is the Ultimation sander. For this type of work, it's the best thing in the world you can have, because you set the angle once and then you can just make as many as you want, and they're all at that same angle. However you make them, you want to make one master, make sure it fits well, and then go ahead and make copies of that one. Making the first one is a little trial and error, but once you get one done, the rest are easy. What you want to try and get is a nice tight fit up under the corner of the roof, and then a nice overhang on the corner trim. Now, once you've glued those in place, you'll also want to do the same under the back roof. And once all of your roof trim is in place, I'll use a tiny brush to touch up the ends, just using the same color as we painted the walls with. Now we're going to finish up the porch. For this railing, we're going to be using the same 1/32 by 3/32 strip wood. Now I'm going to show you two ways you can cut that top rail that sits there. The way that I show it here is a little bit harder, but it looks a little bit better. And this is the way that it's shown in the instructions. You can see you have to cut a couple notches out of there, and they have to be in the right place for where you have the posts. Now, an easier way is what I show here, where you just have separate rail pieces on top of the lower rail. This one's a little easier to do. Now, to do that one, you just take your lower post and hold it up against the porch posts and mark where they go. And then you'll just cut a piece of upper railing to fit in between the marks. So it's pretty easy to do. Now, when we go to mount the lower rail, we're going to want to put marks 3 feet up from the bottom. And that's going to be the bottom of the lower rail. But there's one way that I do it that makes it a little bit easier, and that's to cut 2 spacers that are 3 feet high. And then you set those spacers there, put your glue on the back of the lower rail, and just set it down on those spacers. It makes it real easy to get in position. And then after that, you're going to glue your top rail on whichever way you ended up making it. And again, you can just use white glue and it should fit right in there. And now for the side rail, you're going to do the same thing. You put your lower rail on and then put your upper rail on top of it. And these should overlap the corner trim. Now, in one of the houses I built, I put in a broken rail, and then I used a 2x4 to act as a guard against people falling through it. Company houses aren't always in the best shape, so that's why I wanted to do this. Next, we're going to do the roof details. And this is where you can add your stovepipe, and I'll show you an optional chimney. This is the stovepipe that comes in the kit, and I just painted mine a flat black, and then I rusted it with a rust wash. Now you can use any flat black, and if you have a rust wash, you can use that, or you can use some thinned orange paint. Now, one of the tricky parts of these Tichy smoke jacks is getting it to sit right on an angled roof. And that's because it comes with the flat flashing that you see there. You need to make an angle in that base plate. And here's how I do it. I use a rat tail file, and I'll stick it inside the base plate. And while I'm turning it, I'll lift up so that I'm actually getting an angle that I'm making in that. And that makes it a lot easier to get the stovepipe to sit straight on an angled roof. So once you've got it ready to mount, you just want to use some ACC and drill a hole wherever you want to put it in the roof and glue it in. You may need to hold it to make sure it's straight up while the glue is setting. Many company houses only had one stove that they'd use for both heating and cooking. But the ones I was making were going to have a chimney on them as well. So I moved the stovepipe to the back of the house where there might be a kitchen. Now, if you wanted to use this chimney, it's available from Tichy as part 8123, or Chris says you can email him at Conowingo Models about one. So you'll want to cut the chimney at the roof angle. You can leave it flat and put a square hole in the roof, but I find that a lot harder. So you can use either a saw or a chopper to cut that angle. And then once you have it cut, you want to make sure that it sits upright. You can use a sanding stick or a file to make minor adjustments so it sits up straight. And then after I do that, I'll take a round plastic dowel and glue it inside. The advantage of this is you only need to drill a hole in the roof instead of cutting a square hole that fits. After I did that, I just painted it a dull red. You can use any kind of flat red or flat brown. That'll work for this. And I'll show you how I put the mortar in my chimney. I use this lightweight spackling. There are a lot of methods for putting in mortar using paint, pigment, toothpaste, special products. You may have your favorite way of doing it. Once I put the spackling in the mortar joints, then I'll scrape it off using a small spatula and just let it dry. Now, once I have my chimney and my stovepipe ready to mount, I'll go ahead and drill the appropriate holes in the roof. Now, if you put the smokestack on the back part of the house, you want to drill your hole just inside the edge of the wall. And then for gluing the chimney on the roof, you just need to put glue around the base of the chimney, and it gives you a nice secure mount that I think works better than cutting a square hole in the roof. And for the smokestack, to make sure it's sitting up straight, you can glue it to the inside wall. And that's the advantage of having the hole right next to the wall.
Oh, right.
Now I'm going to show you a couple weathering suggestions. This is how that I weathered these houses. I like to use powdered artist pigments. There are lots of other weathering products out there that you can use. You can use stains to weather your building after you've built it. Or you can use chalks. These show ones that come in sticks and powdered chalks. Or you can use washes that are available, or even oils. The company houses live in a really dirty, dusty environment, and these powdered pigments are really good at replicating that. That's why I wanted to use them here. Now I use brushes, and you can see here where I've done some streaking on the roof using a variety of colors. And you can use a lighter brown or a darker brown on the lower parts of the wall and on the porch area. Now I'll use the soft brushes for putting these on. Or I'll use a narrow brush for doing streaking coming down from windows, whether it's paint or dirt. You can also use weathering pencils. These are a water activated pigment, and you can use these for streaking as well. In this case, I'm using them for rust streaking down from nails holding the railing on. I made the nail holes just using a sharp number 2 pencil. And then I used more pigments on the stovepipe in the back. It gives you a really kind of rough texture that makes it look like rust is on the stovepipe. And you can see more window streaking on the roof here. And now we should be all finished. Since I was building 4 of these for a layout, this is a small company house village. For this layout, we wanted them to be company houses, but after they've been there for a while, so they've gone through some changes. And you can see how with this kit, you have the same basic design. They've just been changed over the years. And a simple kit will give you many variations by just changing the color, the roofing, the way one looks. Now, if any of you are building the O scale model, most everything that I've talked about tonight will apply to what you're building as well. You've had to build the foundation and porch from a variety of parts. And the only thing that you'll need will be some 1/16 by 3/16 inch strip wood for the porch rails. Everything else should be in the kit. And like Jim said, Chris isn't able to make it here tonight, but we want to make sure that you know about my build next week. And that's going to be a wrap up of the Conowingo Models Gray Street Company House version. And there's going to be a free stuff alert coming up. Basically, Chris is asking all who share their builds with this kit, whether it's HO or O scale, you'll be entered to win a free HO scale kit, Dardanelle's Shanty Kit from Conowingo Models. It's like one of the buildings on the right. And this isn't going to be a contest. It's going to be a drawing. So don't feel you don't have a chance. Everybody has an equal chance. The only thing we're asking is the presenter will show a Gray Street house in any version. It can be finished or it can still be in the middle of working on it. The raffle will be done once all the participants have presented it, and you must be present to win. And we're highly encouraging that you email Chris Course to save a spot so that we know how many are going to be there. His email is railrunner130@hotmail.com, and I'll put it in the chat window after this presentation. So that's the end of the Conowingo build along. Let me know if you have any questions.
Greg, I can't thank you enough for doing this. You were the guinea pig for this project, and you and Chris have really come forward and done a magnificent job. So thank you so very much. I'd also like to say
it's been a pleasure.
I'd also like to say the reason for doing these, and I hope you picked up some of it tonight, are the tips that Greg can give you along the way to maybe help improve your modeling, not just on this project, but on other projects that you may build. And tips like how to do the railing in front, how to do some of the weathering, how to do some of the structure builds that he's gone into in the past few shows. This kind of information, if you've never built a kit before, if you never have scratch built anything before, the kind of tips that hopefully you'll pick up from these presentations will make you a better modeler and more proud of the model that you produce. So Greg, again, I can't thank you enough for being the guinea pig for this series. And thanks so much for both you and Chris stepping up and wanting to do this for us.
My pleasure. I'm looking forward to the rest of them.
Now I'd like to turn to, before I introduce Martin Brechbiel for his scratch building portion, Clark, I'd like to come to you and let you talk about the additional tool that needs to be included in your build that starts next Saturday. So if you could come in and talk about that for just a few minutes.
Hi, everybody. How are you? One thing I forgot to list on my little list is some Hydrocal. You need maybe, an 1/8 of a cup of white Hydrocal. And I'm going to show you a little trick that I've learned over the years. Was passed down to me by somebody who actually manufactured Hydrocal kits. So if you can find some big borrower, steal it, and you'll need just a little bit. And we're going to make that into a slurry, make that into a slurry, and we're going to fix up any mistakes that you may have. So that's all. And I hope everybody's ordered their kits, and maybe you've gotten them by now, or at least by tomorrow. And we'll go from there on Saturday.
Clark, we're looking forward to it. Thank you so very much.
No problem.
And now I want to turn to Martin Brechbiel, who's an MMR, the same as Clark is, to talk about scratch building. So Martin, welcome.
Good. Thank you, Jim. Let's see if I can get my slides up.
And for all of you all that enjoy hearing what Martin does when he talks about scratch building, this coming Saturday, you've got a real treat because Martin is our featured modeler this Saturday. So he's going to be on for more than just a short.
Jim, I think got me misscheduled. I think I'm the 31st. Yep. According to the email you sent me, I'm on the 31st.
Okay, then I'll find somebody else for Saturday. I'm sorry. Anyway, then Clark, well, wait a minute, hold it. Go ahead and do your thing, Clark, and then we'll talk about this.
Okay, you can
I'm
hash it out later.
Yeah,
So I'm going to switch from structures entirely over to something that I am always doing, or so it seems in my shop, and that's scratch building a maintenance away car. I have been building maintenance away cars for 20 years because I have fun with them, and they're very liberating, and they pretty much release me into doing whatever I can think of, dream up an excuse to build, and just be as creative as I want to be or simplistic as I want to be. But probably half my roster is maintenance away cars as a result, which is a little uneven. So to start here, basic simple frame, a pile of sticks, a set of arch bar trucks, some of my resin castings for bolsters. Oh yeah, an old bottle of glue, and we're working on top of 1/4-inch glass because I love a nice flat, perfect surface to work on, that if I glue something to it, I can get it back off pretty easily. Sometimes. Sometimes that doesn't work, but it's pretty rare. And another affinity for things that I have had over the last 20 years is to build barrel-shaped things, wooden tanks. And this is just, this plastic piece of round stuff here is something you find in the electrical aisle at Home Depot, piece of conduit tubing. And if you buy a nice 12-foot long piece of this, you have 12 tank cars very quickly. I just hack these up into whatever length I feel like with running them through a bandsaw, or you can cut them by hand with a hacksaw. These are HO 3x10s, and I just glue them on. Well, there's a piece of scribe siding capping off each end, usually pretty close in orientation across both ends. But this is just 3x10s, and they're glued on one at a time, usually working from 2 directions at the same time because it is a little tedious, and it does get old after about the 30th or 40th 3x10. But if you persevere, you end up with a barrel. And these are the ends to hold it in place on the car so it doesn't come sliding off the car. A nice cradle for it. I think there's another slide that has a better picture of the cradle. Barrel bands. These are actually brass. Nice measure directly to the barrel, cut, and there's a little joint underneath where you can't see it into the cradle. And then they are forced on. They're usually a little small, not like a regular barrel, in 1-to-1 size. The bands take a little persuasion sometimes to get on, and I'm at times hammering these on with a screwdriver and a mallet, even in this scale. And it is O scale, just for anybody I didn't mention. There's the cradle. So it's just a bunch of square stock, lots of nut bolt washer castings, and that's glued down a little bit off center on this car because I wanted to have some space at the far end for some other odds and ends. At least I had a dream of that or a plan of it. I don't have plans except after I'm done, and if I decide to draw them up, that's a good time to do it because then I know I've built it exactly to plan. Underbody, the basic K-brake casting. That K-brake casting has to be at least as old as I am, if not older. It still works as well as it did 50 years ago, or 60, or more. I'm at least that old. I used 2 different sizes of queen post because I had four of these nice little brass ones, and I thought, well, 4's nice, but I really want 8, so we'll just put some others. I think those are 3-inch Grandt lines on the outside. This usual 1 piece of surgical silk through the car 4 times, turnbuckles each time. As you pass through, under tension. Brake hangers. I must have been lazy. Those are the precision scale ones. These are my resin brake levers. these clevises are made out of Grandt Line turnbuckles. It seems to be the fastest and easiest way I know to make a decent looking clevis is to use a narrow gauge turnbuckle, stick the wire in one end. This is like 19 thousandths or 20 thousandths wire, brass wire. It's in there with a little bit of glue, a little bit of CA, cut them to fit. Off you go with your underbody plumbing, and just some scrap scribe siding for the cylinder to sit on. I go back up top, put it all together. Car just sits in here, and literally does just sit there. It is not anchored to anything. It could be removed. I've gotten into a bad habit of doing that now and again. These actually are truss rods that are drilled through from all the way out here, all the way through here. There's a little bend in them. They're actually two pieces, and they're fitted to these the turnbuckles. So they're actually holding things together, literally. Lots of leftover parts. The dome here, that's fabricated from a piece of, I don't know what size brass tubing, probably 3/8 inch. You just cut that with a tubing cutter or their Dremel. Some brass on top, a little angle for the top, a handle. This piece of square stock, it's all soldered one unit. There's a hole. I just drill a hole right through the whole thing with the drill press, stick it through, and put it in place with some glue and CA. This is copper foil, and those little dimples in there are actually holes. They're going to get nut bolt and washer castings eventually. And every joint has at least a nut bolt and washer casting on one side of it or both sides as I go through. The other side looks about the same. You can see basically it's the same stuff, only on the other side. There's a ladder on this. I didn't make the ladder. That's a piece of laser cut ladder stock. I'm not sure where it came from, but waste not, want not, pull it out of the box and slap it on somewhere because somebody might want to get up on top of the barrel and open the hatch. This is one of the reasons I left it open at this end. Water's got to get out the other end. So there's a little hole drilled down here, a piece of brass tubing. There's actually a union joint underneath this. That's a Grandt Line brake wheel. Little tiny, I don't know, about a 14-inch brake wheel. And that's all soldered together, except the brake wheel's not soldered in it. Of course, it's styrene. But eventually, at the last little piece, it's stuck through a little tiny hole, a piece of brass wire, and that's left open. These pieces came out of, I think, gondola parts from Grandt Line. I have no idea what part number they are, which is unfortunate because I'd like to get more of them. They're kind of useful at holding things together. And I think that's a Chemtron air hose. So you can get precision scale ones that are very similar. This is what's going to go in the other end, that open space. You need a little spool. So this is a piece of brass rod. That's a dowel. I just drilled a hole down the middle of it. Got it pretty close to center on both ends, which is unusual for me. Some scribe siding on both ends. And we'll see what it looks like when it's all done. So slap some paint on it. We've got our nut bolt washers up here on that copper foil. Let's go around the other end. There we go. Nice brake wheel. Obviously a very nice brake wheel. That's I think it's a precision scale one with a ratchet and pawl casting. Some lighting. You have to see what you're hosing down. Some carbide lamps. And a spool with a hose on it. What a concept. Maybe we can go water and put out the fire. Well, there it is. I guess we'll look at the other side. There's a water bag because you probably don't want to drink the water that's in the tank unless you really have to. Who knows how long it's been there. And the hose fitting here on the end, that's just a couple of pieces of brass tubing that are soldered up, concentric brass tubing, and built up to get us a nice little narrow tip with a larger open end. And this is just solder. Just large, really large solder that I don't use for anything. So this is a good use for it. It goes away and becomes useful on the end of this. It's probably acid core solder, which I probably wouldn't be using for anything anyhow. And another view from the other end. More paint. And there's that ladder on the back end. Another shot from that end. I don't know how many slides I have of that. Well, that is, I guess, the last picture of it. So that's the end of scratch building on a maintenance away car tonight. And you can contact me easily enough. I'm not hard to find. And if there's any questions, shoot them to me. And I'm going to stop sharing. And we're all good. Got real quiet. The whole planet's muted.
Martin, I got a question for you.
There you go.
I
was getting lonely.
You miss it. You mentioned it was acid core solder.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
Do you ever use acid core solder for anything, or you always use rosin core?
I have actually used, it's been about 10 or 12 years since the last time I used it. I had a large box cab body that was made out of galvanized zinc over steel, tin, whatever, and getting galvanized to solder to anything apparently is extremely difficult unless you know what you're doing. And I don't know what I'm doing. So at last resort, I grabbed some of that stuff and said, well, I put enough in here with a big enough torch, something's got to give. And it held together long enough to say, that's finished. That was in one of my columns in the magazine, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 years ago, I guess. But I don't use it very often. It's pretty rare. I have all sorts of rosin core, and I have some silver, and I have some indium solder somewhere, and I've never used it either. But you accumulate these things, and someday you find they actually could be useful. Any other questions?
Martin, I thank you so very much. I'll look forward to seeing you as the featured modeler on the 31st.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to figuring out what I'm going to talk about.
All right, I'm looking forward to it very much so.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Okay.
Well, now I'd like to introduce the featured modeler. Actually, there's 4 featured modelers tonight, all belong to the same club. It's the Great Lakes Modular Group. And Jeff Schumaker is the one that brought the club to my attention. And believe it or not, Jeff and I have been talking about getting the club on this show for months now. Originally, it was scheduled, I think, sometime back in December or January, and that had a conflict, so we moved it. And the next time that we had available was tonight, and that's what we're hoping to get Jeff to tell us about the club that he belongs to. So, Jeff, if you can start us off and introduce the other members of your club that are here tonight, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
All right. Thank you, Jim. The other fellows here with me tonight are Tom Hooermann, Terry Davis, and Jim Foster. I'll set up my sharing here in a minute. I hope everybody can see that. And here we go. All right, the 4 of us are members of the Great Lakes HON 30 module group. We are attempting to model the main 2-foot gauge railroads in HO, actually in HON 30. Roughly, we have 12 members, not all are active. It's about 50-50 as far as modeling prototype locations on the modules as opposed to generic Maine or New England locations. The majority of prototype locations are from the WW&F, which is the Wiscasset, Waterville, and Farmington. It was the 2nd largest 2-foot gauge railroad in the state of Maine. And photos are from various venues we've set up at. And once I'm finished, Terry has a short presentation afterwards. We'll start off with some of Tom's modules. The first module is Gove's Log Yard. Basically, we've used it in the past as staging trains to operate on the layout. And one of the more popular modules at the meets that we set up at is Tom's Chickawaukie Pond. Chickawaukie Pond is an actual location in Maine, I believe. It's the only winter scene we have on as far as our modules go. And it's very nicely depicting an ice cutting operation on the pond. Rabbit Hill. This is one of our end modules. The gentleman there on the left, the taller gentleman, that's Jim Foster, who's also joining us tonight. Our end modules are basically 2 feet by 6 feet in dimension, and it's a 180-degree curve. So basically, when we put our modules together, we have one long oval or short oval, depending on how many people can show up for a given meet. Tom's module has a siding on it that can be used to extend. If we have an odd number of modules, we can stick the odd module on the end here. This is Jim's module, Mewuppinas or Eusliss. It is a very versatile module. It has a small loop on it, so it can be used as a standalone module, which Jim has done on numerous occasions. It's kind of hard to see. It has a curve running off to the left here, as well as one that runs off to the right. It got cut off a little bit. So it can serve as an end module in a pinch. It could also serve as a corner module if we ever needed to set up as an L-shaped layout, which we have not had to do thus far. Tom eventually gave his Gove's Log Yard module to another member, Bob Peterson, and Bob converted it to North Anderson Station. Brian Goodman built a representation of the southern terminal of the Kennebec Central Railroad, which was the shortest 2-foot gauge railroad in the state of Maine. The Kennebec Central served a old soldiers' home, which eventually became part of the VA system. And what we see here is a coal dock along the Kennebec River. Coal would be deposited in the coal dock via barges or coal schooners and hoisted up, and there was little tracks on the top with wooden cars that would haul the coal and dump it in these chutes, and then the railroad would haul the coal up to the soldiers' home, the National Soldiers' Home at Togus, Maine. Also, there was quite a bit of passenger service between Randolph and the Soldiers' Home, taking people up to visit the soldiers along with other entertainment that was available there. They had an opera house, a zoo, and a number of other things. And also bringing the inmates at the soldiers' home down to Randolph, and they could go across the bridge to Gardner, which was the larger city across the river, when they're on furlough. Linekin Bay was built by Stephen Pinkham, It can also be used as a standalone module, as it does have has a loop of track. It also serves as a module along the sides of the layout. There's a straight section that can connect up to other modules. Gliebe's Landing by Phil Gliebe. We have quite a few modules depicting water on the layout. Phil's just shows a setting with, we've got a fishing boat and a small yard and a couple factories. There's an engine house hidden behind this structure here. We have the fish cannery and Weeks Mills. This is one of the prototype modules. It depicts Weeks Mills on the WW&F, which at one point had a branch running off to Winslow, Maine, and the main line ran up to Albion, Maine. This was built by Vic Hamburger, who passed away about 10 years ago. Vic was able to set up with us on one occasion. He's from Massachusetts, where the rest of us are from Ohio and Michigan. It was great to have him show up that one time. And a couple years after his passing, his widow asked if we'd like to have his module, which we gladly accepted and try to show it at any occasion we can. Ford's Mill. This is Terry's set of modules. If we want to vary the track plan away from where the track is setting, and Terry will go into a little bit more detail of that in his presentation, it basically requires to have 2 or more modules. So in this case, it starts at the back, it sweeps out on an S-curve, and then goes back at the other end to join up with the next module. Ford's Mill is also a prototypical location on the WW&F. Wynn's Inlet by Master Model Railroader Sam Swanson. Basically, Sam built this module based around a photo of the structure here in the center of the module. It was a picture of a structure in Down East magazine of, I think it was a lobsterman shed, although I'm not positive on that, on one of the islands of Maine. And so he started with that, has the inlet and all the other structures on the layout. East Dirigo is one of my modules. It's another N module. It's simply a 180-degree turn, depicting a generic village in the state of Maine that might have had a narrow gauge railroad running through it. Schumaker's Mill is another one of my modules depicting a woolen mill that might have been located in the state of Maine. And I usually connect it with East Dirigo. Head Tide Cut is an actual location on the WW&F. There was a large hill that they had to cut through to keep the grade at a reasonable amount. And usually there was a church located here, and at this particular setup, apparently I didn't have the church built yet. And it's only 2 feet by 2 feet square. Head Tide Station was right after, to the north of the cut, another prototype location on the WW&F. It was the first regular station stop after the southern terminal in Wiscasset, Maine. And it had a section house. We have the depot. There was a siding served there. And the front of the module here, if you were standing there, you would be standing in the Sheepscot River. The Head Tide Station was sort of odd. It was built across the river from where the town of Head Tide was. So people had to cross a road bridge to get to the station if they wanted to take the train. Cooper's Mill is another prototype location on the WW&F. It had a different style depot and a potato house. The WW&F was known for the number of potato houses it had along its right-of-way, as the land in the area was favorable for the growing of potatoes. James Pond is another one of my end modules. Again, it can serve as a 180-degree curve. It also can serve as a side module. We have a section here that it will connect up to other modules on the side of the layout. And we've discovered that it could be used also if we needed to make an L-shaped layout. It can serve as a right-hand or a left-hand corner. And it is not a prototype location, but there is an actual James Pond in the state of Maine that's just a few miles from the old right-of-way of the WW&F. Head tide tank. This module is built by Pete Magoon, the current president of the NMRA. It was just further north from Head Tide Station. Basically, it's in, I would say, the wilderness. I got to visit the actual location many years ago, and I mean, fortunately, there was a sand pit with an access road that got us down to the level, and then we could walk following the old right-of-way to get to the location. Another one of Pete's modules is Whitefield. Actually, it's a 2-module combination. Again, it is a prototype location on the WW&F with the depot and the general store. Here's the other end of it. The barn is not prototypical, but we needed something to fill in make it a little less empty than what it would have been. North Whitefield is another 2-set module by Pete, depicting the village north of Whitefield. Again, we have the depot, which is almost hidden. There was a general store and what was called the cash store. And then we have the house and connected structures on the hill. This was built in TT scale for forced perspective. And Winslow. Winslow was on the end of the branch from Weeks Mills, and had an engine house, a depot. Track didn't go much farther than where the depot is located, and a turntable. In 2015, Tom Hooermann and I took a few modules down to the National Narrow Gauge Convention in Houston. There we went up with noted modeler Bob Hayden, who had 3 modules. Bob, earlier that summer, had indicated he would like to sell the 3 modules that he had, so our group worked out a deal with him. So he met up with us. He set up his 3 modules for the convention, and when the convention was over, we took them home with us. Baker Stream is the oldest of these 3 modules. It was built about the same time that Schumaker's Mill was, in 1997, for the narrow gauge convention in Cincinnati, Ohio. Then we have New Glasgow. I believe that was the second one that Bob had built. We have a depot, a turntable, passing siding. Actually, this is a covered depot. We can run trains through it, or at least one time there was. We hope to put a new covered depot on it at some point. And then Hammondsfield. Hammondsfield and Baker Stream were prototype locations on the Sandy River and Rangeley Lakes Railroad, although these are not actually prototype scenes. I think there was a sand or gravel pit at Hammondsfield. I'm not positive on that. This is in Tom's possession, and he added a sawmill to it. So that takes care of my part of the presentation. Terry, if you want to get set up, we can go from there. How do let's see.
Go up to the top and you can,
stop share.
there you go.
That helps. There we go.
All right.
Quick question. Did I see a very large rabbit on one of those?
Yeah,
Yes,
I will
you
explain.
did. There's also a duck in an earlier shot.
I think it was probably, well, it was before I got together with this group in 2004, some visitor to the layout left the rabbit, and that became a mascot.
Well, actually, what had happened is the first time we set up, I think there might have been 4, maybe a half a dozen of us at the time. We were in a mall at an open storefront. And I happened to be looking around at some of the different stuff that had been left behind in the storefront and found this stuffed rabbit. So he immediately became our mascot, and his name is Bun Rab. And as Jim Foster has said, you don't want to stick your finger too close to him because he does security on the layout. And he has about a half a dozen cohorts that help guard the layout during shows.
We also use them as a way for little kids. We can say, can you find the rabbit? Can you find the duck? And so it gives them something to look at if they're not really that keyed up about watching little trains run around. We also say we take our modeling seriously, but we do not take ourselves seriously. I'm going to, what happened is when Jeff said, yeah, we're going to present the layout, slides were being sent around. I put together a presentation, Jeff put together a presentation. So I'll run through this. I don't think there's that much overlap, but this is a picture of the group about 10 years ago. Yeah, I've got a lot darker hair there than I do now. And this is what the layout looked like at Hickory, North Carolina 10 years ago. Not everybody was able to go, but it was a pretty decent size setup. And that's what the other side looks like. The lights are manufactured. I think Jeff did most of those, but they come in very handy for helping highlight the layout. We can also
The idea came from Pete Magoon.
Okay.
He got the idea from I think, and it was an HO standard gauge layout up in New England. I want to say New Hampshire. They had that style of light, and it's a nice style, and it does add to the presentation of the layout.
What'd you make them out of, Jeff?
It's 1/2 inch. Oh shoot, I drawn a blank. The name of basically conduit.
Yeah.
And pardon?
EMT?
Could be. All I do is look for 1/2 inch metal conduit in Lowe's. And I know where it is in the local Lowe's, so I don't have to ask for it. It's a utility light with a 5.5 inch bell on it. And we add a longer extension cord so that we can daisy chain it around the layout.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Very nice.
This is a smaller setup at Carillon Park, but we have set up at times where we've only had 2 modules on the side and 2 end modules. Of critical issue is having the end modules. And this was a setup, a slightly out of focus picture at one of the national narrow gauge shows.
I think that's Minneapolis. Or no, maybe it was Portland.
Augusta. Portland. No, that's Augusta, maybe.
Okay.
Basically, we're modeling the Maine 2-foot narrow gauges, unique to Maine, 193, 95 miles of track. End scale is what we use because we can use the mechanisms, the trucks, the track, but it scales out to be 30 inches. So it's actually HON 30 instead of HON 2. Why do we model this? Because, boy, the equipment is sure cute. And that's at the WW&F Railway Museum. And if you ever get a chance to go up to Alna, Maine, which is a little north of Wiscasset in the Booth Bay area, it's well worth going and checking out what they've done. They've got about 3 miles of track laid. Jeff goes out there twice a year and volunteers for a week. There's an idea. You can see the difference in the equipment. That's a 2-foot gauge car on the right and then a standard gauge car on the left. Everything had to be smaller. Passenger cars had 1 row of seats on either side of the aisle. Okay, we don't actually have memberships or dues. We just get together. We've got an email list that we, send stuff back and forth on. And then I've got a bunch of pictures of just some of the modeling. This is Jim Foster's module. This is the one that can be used in a variety of different ways. That's also his module. This is the North Whitefield model that Pete Magoon built. That's the TT scale house in the background for force perspective. Okay, the basic standards, 48 inches from floor to rail top. The concept when the guys put these together is that the train would go through the scenery. The scenery and the structures were going to be to the forefront, the train would be behind, which is fine, but it does create interesting issues if you're trying to build something and most of what you want is going to be behind the track. And I'll talk about that a little bit further. Modules are 24 inches, 30 inches wide, and we keep them at our own houses. We don't have a central location. This is the modules that Sam, or the module that Sam built, Winds Inlet. This has been featured in the Narrow Gauge Gazette, I think 13 articles on the construction of this. It's another picture of that. This is an overhead view of Ford and King's Mill. It's another picture of it. This is the Chickawaukie Pond that Tom built. Head tide tank. We had a nice little thing happen about 4 years ago when Mini Trains released a ready-to-run locomotive with a flywheel in it that looks pretty close to a Maine 40. And so that's been a major boom. Prior to that, everything had to be in-scale mechanism and kits that various people produced put over the top of them. Like that's what this is. Jeff, what is the history on this one?
I think that's Jim's locomotive now. A friend of ours, Bill Vollmer, built it based on an article in Model Railroader. I want to say the early 2000s. It might have been before that. And he went from HON 30 into ON 30 and sold off most of his HON 30 equipment. And Jim ended up with that. Jim, if you want to add anything to that, go right ahead.
I believe that the mechanism is an N-scale dockside, which is a very versatile mechanism with a couple of pattern failures associated with it. And if you get a good one, they're very smooth, they're very reliable. And the body on that was a combination white metal and brass kit.
One of the most popular soft drinks in the country at one point in time was Moxie Cola, which is the state soft drink of Maine. They did not put it in tank cars, but again, this is just with chowder. This is the log yard that Tom built. Another picture of that locomotive that Jim has. Shoemaker's Mill.
What's the, Jim, can you tell them what the passenger car kit, those two kits were?
I believe they're Railway Recollections kits.
About 50% of the structures on the layout are scratch built and about 50 are kits. Yeah, this is one of Pete's modules. That's Winslow. Some different perspective of the layout. There's the farm scene. And so you can see we range from Traverse City to Cincinnati, Ohio. And we've got people that are affiliated with us in several different places. In fact, one is in the United Kingdom temporarily. And there's our duck security crew, but this is what the layout looks like looking up above. The aisle in the back is strictly for the electrical stuff. It's not, you know, we stand out in front of it when we're actually displaying it. This is Jim Foster's module again. That's Gliebe's inlet or landing. Another view of head tide tank. And there's the Ford and Kings Mills. This is Whitefield. North Whitefield. It's an interesting setup they have in Maine. Everything is within a city limit. And so you'll have these areas that are named as a city that are extremely rural.
And what is the quote newest locomotive on the layout, time wise, scenery wise, I guess?
I can answer that. Mine is set in 1940. So that's why you saw some newer vehicles on it. There's a 1940 Ford, which would essentially be new, except it's filthy. It's being driven on dirt roads. The dump truck is a 1936 Ford. It's also filthy. And then there's also a 37 Chevy next to this house that you see on the picture here. And it's 3 years old. And of course, it's very dirty. The reason I chose 1940 was to allow certain kinds of things like that. And 1940 is still consistent with two of the main 2 footers. They were still operating at that time. I would say that the other modules are set in the teens and 20s. Mine is the only one that's a later version.
Well, I mean, well, I probably wasn't making myself clear. I was talking about locomotive wise.
Locomotive, I would say that, well, all right, let me back up a little bit. All of the steam locomotives date from what I would say is prior to about 1920. We do have some diesels that we use from time to time just to keep the layout operating, and along with some rail buses. But the steam locomotives are definitely over 100 years old.
Thank you.
The none of the main two-footers ran diesels, but there were industrial lines that were set to 2-foot gauge that did. And in the early days, trying to get a steam locomotive for HON 30 was just very difficult, especially one that would run reliably. I'm not sure what the mechanism and the kit was on this. There's our duck on security crew.
The kit, oh geez, it was a brass etch kit developed, I want to say back in the mid to late 70s.
That Robert Sloan, I believe.
There you go. I couldn't remember the name. It was Robert Sloan etching. The mechanism is a Minitrix 060 with the rear driver removed. The opening where the rear driver would be is covered by the ash pan. I got this at a train show years ago. And I repainted the cab and tank because a lot of the locomotives early on were painted with I don't want to call it a Pullman green, but it was some sort of an olive green. I can't remember what Baldwin called that color. I think they started it. The Portland Locomotive Works, which is what this particular model represents, followed suit. Eventually, they went away from the colors and just painted the cabs black. In some cases, even the domes were painted whatever color the cab and tank were. But it's actually an 060 mechanism with the rear driver removed.
As an aside, the WW&F Museum in Alma, Maine does have a number of industrial 2-foot locomotives that they use for work trains and general maintenance and their summertime track laying activities, which a friend of mine has invited me to participate in. However, after 60 years of laying spikes, he's much better at it and in much better shape. But they use diesels day in and day out up there when they're not running the steam.
The Alma, Maine, is that the railroad that used to be at the docks down in Portland?
Sort of. The main narrow gauge, which you're referring to down in Portland, is still there. The property that the museum proper was on was sold. So they had to come up with a plan to sort of tide them over until they got a new building built along the right-of-way, which they have their track. That's in the process of being done. In the meantime, they have sort of joined with the WW&F Museum, and much of their historical equipment has been moved up to the WW&F. There's cars from the Sandy River and Rangeley Lakes. Bridgeton and Saco River, and as well as the WW&F up there.
I was at Portland several years ago and saw the engine shed. Talked to one of the volunteers up there, but never got to look inside of it because they had 2 steam engines inside. I would love to have seen.
Well, they actually have 4 steam engines, 2 of which are operable. The 2 that aren't are currently up at Alna on display. One of them is, I believe, is still down at Portland for when they operate. And the 4th one travels back and forth. Sometimes it's at Portland, sometimes it's up at the WW&F. And this just recently happened shortly before the pandemic hit. So things are kind of fluid. I suspect that once they get their new structure built, some of the equipment will be moving back down to Portland.
There are a couple of videos on YouTube of the steam up last about a year ago, and they're well worth watching. They've got at least 3, if not 4, Forneys fired up. This is a fellow that comes around with us occasionally. He has a bunch of Maine 2-foot stuff in 45 millimeter gauge, and a lot of it's live steam. I'm going to wrap up. I've got about 12 slides. I just want to kind of show a little bit how I developed my modules for this, and started off with the original pictures and said, that looks kind of neat. I'd like to really do that. And this is the 2 weirs that are out in the middle of the pond behind the dam to direct the timber over to the sawmill. That's one of those weirs. That's what it looks like now. There's another view of the 2 mills. And you can see Ford's mill on the left, and there was a bridge that was right nearby. And so those were the things I wanted to incorporate in what I was modeling. So built the modules, the legs fold up inside for transport. And I used an angle beam to keep the legs up. And the thing that I ran into is, in order to make sure that where my modules were going to fit into what had been modeled on either end of it, as far as prototype, all the stuff needed to be behind the track for the river to flow the right way. So I decided to go with a 30-inch wide module and had to use 2 modules in order to do it. And this is basically what the map looked like of what I was trying to model. And I wanted to get the area basically right there into the module. And so there's shaping the foam that I used for the base. I drew up my plans for both structures with Corel Draw, basically used a caliper and, appropriate windows that I was able to get from Grandt Line. And in 2007, I had the rough part of it ready to go. 2008, there's a little bit more shrubbery and stuff. The bridge is used to cover the gap between the 2 modules, part of it. Started putting the picture that I used on the front of the module so people could see what I was doing. There's a picture from 2015, I think. 2016, I got, had a couple of pictures that was in a British narrow gauge magazine. This is the convention that was in Augusta, Maine. And that's from that convention. And then in 2018, we set up in Minneapolis at the narrow gauge convention. And the major difference in this picture is you can see there's been some flowers added. My wife has enjoyed doing some of the landscaping, and she also painted the backdrops for me, which has been really beneficial because I'm red, green, brown colorblind, and so scenery can be a challenge at times. And this is the layout set up at the annual narrow gauge show that's held near Youngstown, Ohio, and usually in March. It's been canceled the last 2 years. So that's what we've got. And if you have any further comments or questions that you'd like to get information on, there's our email addresses. And anybody have any questions or?
Well, I do. Wouldn't Z-scale be more correct in size or no?
What scale?
If we were using like Z-scale track,
Yes.
it is actually under 2 feet. There's a German manufacturer. Is it Bush?
Believe that's so.
Yeah, it's recently come out with what's called HOF, and it's HO scale running on Z scale track. And it's basically industrial stuff. The reason why we're using N scale is that's when this started. There were a few modelers back in the late 60s, Dave Frary and Bob Hayden being two of them. They couldn't actually model it in actual 2-foot scale because there weren't motors small enough at that time. And with the introduction of N scale, they thought, hey, well, this might work. The mechanisms were about the right size. So they were just taking mechanisms and scratch building superstructures on them. And the fact that N scale was 6 inches wider than the prototype, that didn't bother them. So that's how it got started. And we've stuck to it ever since.
It apparently didn't bother Bachmann when they decided to release their ON30 modules models either. And they've done amazing things for narrow gauge modeling. There's a lot of people that model in ON30.
I would also add, as a practical matter, N scale mechanisms are so good now that you can make a really nice operating layout in HON30. And I don't think that any of us consider it cheating.
Well, I have a question for you. Gentlemen, what's next for the club?
Finding a few younger members that can help us get these things into where we're setting up.
That's an interesting question, sir. I can tell you that if all of us are basically present, and I think the closest we have been to that was at the National Narrow Gauge Convention in Augusta, Maine. The layout is 44 feet long. And it's unusual for us to be in a spot that'll give us 44 feet. As a practical matter, we tend to be somewhat less than that. It's an interesting question, what you just asked. I would guess that I'm not sure we can make it bigger, but we may be able to sometime make it L-shaped. And there's always little things to do to any layout, and you all would know that. But is there going to be a gross change? I would doubt it.
You have beautiful layout, beautiful modules. You all ought to really be proud of what you've accomplished and the detail and prototypical views that you've incorporated into your modeling. It's fantastic.
Well, thank you.
Very kind of you, sir. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions for Jeff and the other people?
Gentlemen, I've enjoyed the living daylights out of this, but I have to leave. The dog is hollering. And when the dog hollers, that means one thing. It means we got to go outside. So thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for looking at our layout. I'm glad you liked it.
Oh, I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. Thanks so much for coming. Jeff, I appreciate so much you being the leader of this for me and putting all this together. I really do appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for taking the time and sharing your layout with us.
It was our pleasure.
All right, for next time, well, before I get to next time, we have the build along on March the 31st. Chris and Greg are going to do the special My Bill section with the prize raffle for one of the people that show us the model that they built along with Greg's build. So that'll be coming up next time. Clark Cooning in his downtown Deco bill starts the next meeting on the 27th. Bob Farquhar building the Blair Line structure. It starts on April the 17th. And Gaylord Gill and Randy are doing the Bar Mills bill of the one kit that starts also on April the 17th. Rick and Maureen Hunter's Hunter Line 30-foot King Truck Truss Bridge build starts May the 22nd. And this September, Bill Davis and Steve Milley are going to put together a model based on a rail scales kit, and they'll be starting in September this fall. We're not going to do this during the summer based on people wanting to hopefully get out of the house a little bit and have some freedom from the lockdown. So after Rick and Maureen, then we're going to stop it until this fall. Next time we have a full show. But before I get to that again, let me ask this. Is Phil at home here tonight?
He was earlier. Phil?
I know I saw him earlier, but I don't know whether he's still here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Phil, let me ask you a question. Do you have pictures or slides that you can show of the one kit that you're proposing to build?
You want me to do it now, or?
You could if you want to, yeah.
Okay, let me see if I've got,
Let me go ahead and finish while you're doing that, and then I'll come right back to you. But I hope everybody does stay and watch this, because I was really impressed when Phil sent me these the plans that he's got for the build along with Gaylord.
Give me about a minute and a half.
Yeah, that's fine. So next time, Saturday, March the 27th, we have Patrick Grace, who is from Scotland, who is going to be here talking about his modeling. And I think you're really going to enjoy hearing from Patrick. Clark Cooning starts his build along with the downtown Deco kit. And I hope you'll build along with him, and certainly following, because Clark is a wealth of modeling information, having done the modeling with the master's program for the NMRA for years and years. Greg Cassidy is coming with his What's New section about what manufacturers are building and offering as new kits. Fred Cosgrove is starting a new series for us called Trolley Modeling. Dave Silvermail is starting a new series for us called Scenic Elements. And Rick and Maureen Hunter are back with their Hunter Line weathering segment. So it's going to be a full show. There's going to be an awful lot of modeling that's going to be exhibited and talked about by an awful lot of really true professional master builders. So I don't know whether that's giving you enough time, Phil, but if it has, then I'll come back to you and take a photo.
It actually did. So hang on, let me share my screen. Then I'll throw this in a slideshow, but I actually had made a slideshow, so I sent off to Jim. So I've been taking a bunch of pictures because eventually the idea is I think to make some sort of article out of it. So when I got the thing and started looking at it, so to do this, I ended up looking for a building on the South Pacific coast. The South Pacific coast was a railroad that ran from Oakland in California down through Silicon Valley, over the hills to the ocean. And up in the hills, I found this in Boulder Creek, which is up in the mountains, this hotel. So it was built in 1897, called the Commercial Hotel. And it was operated until 1953, when it was torn down to become a supermarket. And as I found these pictures of the building, I just found it to be just kind of an entrancing building of where people would go for vacation. So if you lived in San Francisco or those areas, this is the kind of place you would go go up in the mountains on vacation, you know, at the turn of the century. So these are some other pictures of it. So these are kind of all the elements that are left of it. Luckily there's a guy who's done an incredible website out here of the trains of Santa Cruz County, which is where this was. So one of the things I do is I use PowerPoint a lot, just because it turns out PowerPoint's a great drawing program. If you click, it gives you the size of everything. So basically what I've done is I've imported the pictures over, and then by picking something that you know the size of, like a door, you can now use that to start scaling everything off the building and get scaled dimensions for the building. And you kind of, if you look at this, what really intrigued me is, if you look at the side of the building, you see kind of the regular spacing of the windows. And that looked to me like that would fit in really well with the one kit because of the regular spacing across the pieces for the windows. So this is, the other thing is to go look at the Sanborn map. So this is the Sanborn map of Boulder Creek. And this is zoomed way in, but I found where the hotel was located, and you can kind of see on this map right here where my mouse is moving, you know, this is the balcony out here. What's really cool is it actually gives you that they had a salon or saloon, depending upon your viewpoint of the time frame, an office, then there was a dining room with a kitchen behind, and clearly there's some stairs up, and then the rooms would be all upstairs. So by doing that, you're actually able to, if you go do Control Alt print screen, you can capture the screen, your browser of the Sanborn map zoomed way in. So you capture that image, and then you go down and capture the scale at the same zoom in and bring both of them over and crop them down. So basically each one of these scales is a crop down little piece. And now you can bring them over, and you can use these red boxes or just squares, and you can project over. So for example, if you project the balcony here, you can project it over and see it's just exactly 8 feet. So I was able to use that to get most of the dimensions of the building. And this is kind of what I ended up coming up with the dimensions of the building. Actually, I think the 19-3 is wrong. I was changing that really most recently. The one thing I did, which is kind of different, this was a compromise. If you notice, the kitchen just kept going continuously back. And the problem was that was going to be another break, because I put a break right about here on the drawing. So the problem is, or in the panel, so you get basically one panel from here to about here, and then another panel will run to here. The problem was it wouldn't run for this whole building. So I moved this over a little bit so I wouldn't have another break in the wall. I could just hide it with a corner there. So these are basically the designs. Again, I do this in PowerPoint just because it's easier than learning a drawing package for me. But what it's done is it's let me now draw this on the backs of the pieces. I actually did it the 5 3/4 high, because it turned out that was just almost ideal. I was able to scrunch the building down about 1.5 feet to do that. And I don't have it here. I'd show it when I get a little bit farther, a lot better design. What I've on the PowerPoint where these were designed, they're designed full size. So it actually becomes a big thing. But what you do is you create those boxes with squares to actually show where all the cuts are in the actual pieces of wood. So you drag that down and then use that to position all the windows. And then you can actually get, so these windows are all accurately positioned to where the cut marks will be in the bar mill's wood, because it was actually taken off of that, the dimensions. So if you look at them, you notice that there's a fairly narrow gap between the edge of the wood and the first set of cuts for windows. Then you've got the 32 inches, then 32, 32, 64, 32. And then this is 3 spaces here. So you can kind of see it follows what the kit is. So I was looking at this, and clearly there's a huge challenge in the even in O scale doing the balconies and the roof there. These are, by the way, my cutting templates. So I'm actually starting to cut the wood now. And my kind of next trying to figure out is how to join the pieces together. And this is kind of what it's going to look like on the hill. I'm actually now laying out this deck work to go down here, and I'll show you how this is actually going to be built. So there are our footings here, and I actually just got done doing the footings. So one of the things I figured out when I did this was that it's really going to be hard to do all this stuff in wood and make it look really good. So, you know, if you go back and look at this, and you look at this picture and look up underneath here at this and at this wood over here. And I should blow this up larger. Next time I do this, I'll blow it up larger so you see. I mean, the whole perspective is replicating that detail. If you notice, one of the things, all of the cross pieces this way and the joists running this way, they're all cut in. They're not on top of each other. You normally, when we build a deck in model railroad, you put one side of wood this way, one side of wood this way. These are all inset down. And to try to notch those, and there are probably hundreds there. So the conclusion was, and I'll go ahead and stop sharing. And now actually, I'm going to have to stop my virtual background because it will goof this up. Yeah, so if you can click me and zoom on me. So the first thing I did was I looked at that balcony, and I said what I would do is actually build that. So this is actually a 3D printed complete balcony. It's actually been printed as a set of pieces. So if you look here, you can actually see right here is a break. So this is one piece. This is a piece from here to here. This is a piece. When you turn it over from underneath, you won't be able to see that because all you'll see is it from underneath. But if you notice, it's that if you kind of look at this, excuse me, it goes this way. So hang on, let me get that right for the camera. I got to come down here and go. No, I got to go the other way for you. Oh, I got it wrong. There, I got to do it like that. So if you look at that and then look up underneath on the picture, well, you can't see the picture. When I put the picture back up, you'll actually see the same shape. And so then what I did after that, this is the next level down. So that's basically that's the deck below that's behind the horses that in the earlier picture. And then the ends of the building. So hang on, let me share my screen again so you can see this, because it really makes a lot more sense if you can actually see what I'm trying to cover. So if you notice, the ends of the building there are it has this real deep detail up here that comes back against a wide board, and that's kind of the in-building detail here. So what I did was I've actually printed that as a printed piece. And then the last two things that I did were, one was that those balcony railings, which are really this kind of fine detail. And so these will get cut down into individual pieces between the joists. And then, you know, the nice thing about a printer is you can print, these are our piers, and they're all printed to exactly the right height to hold the deck to have it all match up. So the idea is kind of to take, you know, again, if you kind of look at the building, to build all the things in the building that you can, but where there are things that are really difficult to produce in wood, to use the 3D printing to produce them. So what I'm doing now, and I'm fighting my printer a little bit, I'm just putting a new head on it, is I'm actually printing these as individual 3D printed, and they're pretty much built to scale. But they're actually fairly solid because the filament printing actually makes stuff pretty solid. And like, if you look at this railing, I think it'd be, even in O scale, it'd be virtually impossible to make that out of wood without laser cutting it. So anyways, I think it's kind of interesting how you can combine kind of what I call traditional techniques with doing something a little different. So that's kind of the plan.
I'm really impressed, Phil, and it's the kind of model that I was hoping people would consider, because that's as close to scratch building as I think a lot of people may want to get. And I think at the same time, it basically is scratch building the way that you're doing it, and without any plans to work from. You're taking a photo and you're recreating a model of it. And that's exactly what I was hoping would happen when Gaylord came to me with this idea. And I'm so happy that what you're doing shows that. So thank you so very much.
No, absolutely.
Well, that's it for this evening, everyone. I thank you so much for being here. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've learned something. I think you've had some great people that have tried to give you the benefit of their knowledge and their abilities. And I wish you the best in taking that and improving your own modeling. Thank you again for